Scene 1 ABC, take 2.
That's scene 1 A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Take 2.
It's because there's 3 cameras, so they use 3 letters to represent the cameras.
Thanks for explaining that, Joe. I just thought they liked the alphabet. Howdy, this is Lemmy with RevZilla. Today you can see I've got a Spurgey, I've got a Joe, I've got a stack of orange cards, and I have a gray couch. You know what that means. You're here for another episode of Highside, Lowside. Today on the docket, this will be a quick one. This is just going to be a very fast episode, not much discussion here. We're just going to be talking a little geography lesson here and there. Just going to talk about motorcycles' country of origin.
We're just going to open a can of worms.
That should go rapidly.
But before we do that, remember that for Season 2, we're going beyond the couch, and there is an expanded version of the podcast. So we are going to be doing interviews with influential people in the motorcycle community. We're going to be responding to viewers' comments that you're leaving in that little section below in the video. So make sure you check out that podcast. For Season 2, Episode 2, we're going to be diving into an interview with Chris Fillmore, 3-time Pikes Peak champion. We're getting his thoughts on everything from how he got started into motorcycling to, the future of really what's going to be happening at Pikes Peak. So make sure you just type in RevZilla to wherever you get your podcast, Apple, iTunes, or any of the other podcasting apps of choice.
Can you show us again how they should type it in?
That's how I type.
Okay.
I was listening to dazzle them with my jazz hands.
So today's topic, kind of talking about where motorcycles come from, where they're made. When a boy motorcycle
meets a girl motorcycle, there's a stork and it flies overhead.
No, so this is a topic I think that's kind of interesting because I think we're going to experience both with us and with the audience sort of a wide breadth of opinions, but also I think a wide variation in strength of opinion. I think this is a topic that some people feel very strongly about, and then I think this is also something that some people just, do not care in the slightest.
I think there's also probably a segment of people that just aren't aware of some of the things that we'll probably dive into.
I would say I'm probably the least aware person here or there in video
we
land.
We need to throw out the disclaimer again that we're just regular motorcycle guys. We're not really truly experts about anything other than the fact that we all ride motorcycles pretty regularly.
Most of experts on
He's sandbagging folks.
We're the common men of motorcycling.
Joe's got his master's degree in economics.
So that's with a minor in motorcyclomics. So that actually leads well, I think, into my first question, which is going to be sort of the basis of this. So briefly, don't kill it here, but my first question to you guys is, do you care about a motorcycle's country of origin?
I really don't. If it's made well and it's not falling apart or leaking oil every time I park it, cool. They did a fine job.
Kind of.
Okay.
Sometimes. No, I mean, it's like, it depends, I guess. That's not clear at all, but because we can dive into it. But
so what you're saying is it's a mess.
Yeah,
it's complicated. I feel like
it's very complicated.
Much like a Facebook post. That's
but I guess for me it's like I don't care. I don't care about I have to ride an American vehicle, right? Like I'm not one of these people that I have to buy a Harley because I have to have something American made. Like I think it's kind of cool that I own one of the earlier Triumphs that's made in Hinckley versus
humble brag. You got a humble brag.
No, I'm just saying. I think that's kind of cool. But
one of the early Triumphs is made in Hinckley. Joe, can you comment?
Yeah. So what year is your early Triumph?
05.
Okay.
It's not a Meridian. It's
right.
I think.
No, I guess for me it's but then again I've ridden some of the newer bikes. I've ridden some of the bikes that are made in Indonesia. Is that where the new ones are?
Thailand.
And they don't bother me at all. I mean, the quality.
Can you tell the difference?
Not at all. 100% cannot.
I mean, my Tiger is a UK made Tiger, and Chase, our
producer. We're putting a producer behind the lens,
master wizard of video filming.
That's on his business card. His business card's actually about this long.
Well, I mean, his Daytona is a later model, so that his Daytona is a Thailand bike. But I mean, really, you can't tell the difference side by side. They both sound exactly the same. They run great. So,
I don't want to jump ahead, which I have a tendency to do, but that does drive me insane when people are like, I'm not going to buy it because it's not made in, Germany. And I'm like that was a big thing with the BMWs. And I'm just like, guys,
it's really convoluted.
You tell me if you can find out, if you know that the engines are made in China.
So I'm going to levy my answer on this. I kind of agree with you in that for me, my loving motorcycles, my primary interest is this a great motorcycle? I'm kind of with you in that I don't have to have a motorcycle necessarily from one specific place, but I do care quite a bit actually about country of origin. And I'll get into some of my reasons on that a little bit later. But I think it's fair, at least for the audience, to know where we're coming from. We share with them our riding backgrounds, etc. But in order to kind of interpret the points that we might be making or defending, I think it's fair for them to have an idea where.
So now you know.
Stuff.
And knowing is half the battle.
All right, so let's
The
get
more
that
you know.
out of there.
Post hopefully adds that in there.
Alrighty. Is there a quality difference based on a part or motorcycle's point of origin? How much of that is perceived? How much is real? And has that changed over time?
I'll go back to owning some classic vehicles. I've had some pure American, 50s and 60s automobiles, trucks and cars and things like that, where everything was U.S. built. And it had a bit of, like serviceability vibe to it, like early Harleys do the same thing. Like everything has grease fittings, replaceable bearings. It was made to be worked on.
Is that due to country of origin, or is that due to the time?
I think it really was
made?
the time period. That's exactly what I'm getting at. I think there's a misconception there where, people would buy a Harley or specifically ride an older Harley and say like, this is because I'm all American, 100% American. Well, when you look back to the early 70s, that's when Harley started to have Japanese forks and starters and, import parts started to be known on American vehicles like throughout the 70s. Since then, the waters have been even further muddied because there's so many more parts and systems on modern vehicles because of how complex they are.
Now, just to be argumentative with you for a second, though, I think you could also sort of take the viewpoint that even a 70s Super Glide with a Showa fork on it, that was still probably at that time probably the most American bike you could buy, if buying American was what was important to you. So I guess what I'm asking you is, were you interpreting what those riders were saying correctly? They weren't maybe saying this is all American. Maybe they were saying this is the most American thing I can buy. Like one of the things that I get a little,
or did they not know?
That could be that. One of the things I get a little stressed out about, and I'm sure other people have run into this too, is there are some things that I buy that I could, if I wanted to buy it, say American made, I can't do that. Like if I want an American made cell phone, I don't think that's a thing. I don't think I can even go buy one of those.
Vacuum
I don't know
tubes.
How to build one.
You can't buy vacuum tubes that are made in America anymore. No, I'm serious. It's interesting. Like from the guitar amplification side of things, you can no longer, because of the way the emissions laws are in America, you can no longer manufacture vacuum tubes.
Oh yeah, I got
in America.
Wow.
So that's why you can either get Russian or Chinese, and there's really only two factories that are making all these different
groove
different tubes. Groove tubes are just Chinese at this point.
Every one of these shows, I learned something.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to your original question because I know you guys kind of went off on things that were important to you, which was a subtopic. But I do think, for me, when you're looking at, I think it has less to do with country of origin and who's overseeing the quality control. Within a 6-month time, I rode a CSC motorcycle, and then I rode a brand new BMW F850 GS. And BMW caught some flack because there were some parts in the bike that were, not German made.
Yes.
And the bike was amazing.
The CSC?
No. But the CSC was $2,000, $2,200.
You were very kind to the CSC.
But for that kind of money, I can't get mad at it.
I agree.
For BMW, what they're charging, I think that they presented a really high quality product. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that it's a conglomerate of parts. The suspension on it was a German-made suspension, I believe.
Right.
And then it's like, I think the engine was produced in China. But I think for me, you have to look at the totality of what those parts are. Is there a weak link? Possibly. I mean, but I think that's regardless of where the motorcycle is manufactured or where the parts come from. Like, I think it's unfair to just say, okay, well, because I'm seeing this name of origin on where this was produced, I'm going to automatically prejudge it. I think you miss out on a lot of really cool things.
When you talking about the CSC compared to the new BMW, I mean, to be more fair, compare it to the Benelli that we have.
Sure.
So there are two Chinese-built motorcycles. The Benelli is easily 3 or 4
shoulders.
times better. The suspension, the brakes, the motor, everything about
Not
it.
even a fair competition.
So I mean, you take two Chinese-built bikes side by side. Obviously, the Benelli costs twice as much.
Well, that's
which
what I'm
is still
saying. It's over twice as much. So I guess that's up to you as for how much you want to spend, right?
Well, so Joe was just hitting on an I think probably the crux of this whole thing for me is that the country of origin is not. It might affect it, but it's not the sole determinant.
Yes.
And to your point too, there is a quality difference in those. I think a lot of times Americans are exposed, especially with Chinese goods particularly, exposed to stuff that is just low quality. Simply because once the Chinese are capable of building phenomenal items.
Well, there's a
However,
lot of different factories in China.
Exactly.
The Chinese people are like 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion, and they're like, oh well, I bought this one thing that said "Made in China" on it once. And I'm gonna judge it. It's like, well, time out.
Well, but my point too, though, is as you spec out a higher and higher quality product to be made in China, well, the cost goes up, and at that point, at some point, the advantage of having it made overseas economically disappears, and then you're just better off making it here anyway. So I think what you tend to see are goods with low spec often coming from China, but they don't. That it's not that that's all that's available. That's just all that we happen to import here. All right, cool. Let's move on.
We trudged
I like
through
that. That was good.
We're agreeing more than I thought.
I'm feeling good though.
We're
too.
not
I feel like
even
we're not
yelling
even.
at each other
I feel like
yet.
we're
Joe
not
doesn't
really
even have to play
treading
ref
on
yet.
anything. We're just having a good conversation. Yeah.
We're
I like
walking
this.
that line.
How you guys feeling out there? This is a good episode. I
Very
like this one.
dicey
Yeah.
subject.
All right,
So we're only
now-
2 questions in. There's like what, 3 or 4 to go over there.
So now, if any of the manufacturers are thinking about, man, those guys are really good for motorcycling, we can now tick them right off. Are manufacturers playing both sides of the coin when they push a brand's heritage as being tied to a particular geographic location, but then make their motorcycles in a different location?
Absolutely. I think about specifically Triumph. I'm a Triumph guy, and a lot of experience with the earlier bikes, the Meriden bikes. And then when the Hinckley bike started to happen, it was like, oh wow,
Wait, so that's it's Meriden? So I pronounced
It's
that wrong
Meriden.
earlier?
Yeah, I was gonna tease you and then I let it go.
So Meriden.
Okay.
I've learned something new
there
now
you
too.
go.
Thank
See,
you.
We're just a
Why are you
big-
such in pronunciation today?
Bucket
I
of
don't know. I'm learning things.
So anyway, when the Bonnevilles came back, and they were, oh wow, these are true like UK built Triumphs, and they're back. Cool, this is awesome. Now think back to the early 2002. I think the Bonneville came back.
Something like that,
2001.
If they were built in Thailand then, would they have exploded in popularity as much as they did since they were true UK built bikes at that point?
That's a fair question.
So that's exactly what you're saying is it's like,
So
man, did
I
that
will-
really have an impact on it? then?
I was one of those early purchasers. I bought my bike. I saw it for the first time in 2004, bought it in 2005. For me, it was something that I saw, identified with the look, and I'm like, I'm going to buy this. So
I actually love that point from almost like a philosophical sort of thing. Because basically what I asked here is, well, these guys don't seem to give a damn where they're making them as long as they're making a couple bucks. And what you're saying is, I don't give a damn where they're making them either, as long as it looks cool and makes me feel happy. I actually really like that response to that, because that reconciles sort of, like my response to this is like, this is bunk that they do that. I've seen, and we're picking on Triumph here, but at some point I remember seeing a Triumph, one of the Bonnevilles, one of the modern classics, with this big British flag like on the tank.
Right.
And then I looked at the VIN, so I looked at the first character of the VIN, and I was like, that's not a British-made bike. That's
Right.
very...
Yeah, but, I mean, it's selling the
it's like the
heritage.
U.S. flag, with the Made in China tag on it. It's like, well, that's a little strange. But I
Yeah.
actually really like your way of looking at that.
well, you have to keep in mind too that I was a kid and I just wanted the cool bike. I think that
But it seems like your feeling hasn't changed.
I think that where this debate comes in is like now it's like we've had many debates about like let's turn the lens on Indian for a second, right? And Indians Indians waving this like we're early 1900s vintage proud blah 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 blah. It's like they're touting a history that they don't own the history.
Well, in fairness, we're a little afield of country of origin now. So I'm gonna
you want to come back
wrap
around?
this one up just so we can get like. Now we're getting into all sorts of
But
other
it's just,
stuff.
but it's the same thing. You're quite go pull that card back up. your question was, is it offensive to you that a country that a motorcycle manufacturer is touting a country of origin as like the big selling point?
But Indians making them bikes here. They're making them here.
They're making components of them here that are selling here. They're also opening up factories overseas to sell overseas to overseas markets.
They're jumping ahead.
But my point is that like it's the little things. I think the bigger question here is the little things that manufacturers do. Does it matter, right? Like I would rather have the best components on a motorcycle than like have a purely American-made bike.
Sure.
Yeah.
So now I'm very mad because I liked your point and we were in agreement and I even philosophically I liked it and then you ruined it. And you had
I didn't ruin it. I I took the question
Nope,
even
now-
further.
Now
It's
I'm
an
mad.
emotional
We made
roller
it a
coaster.
bigger
Very
question.
mad right now. Okay, so kind of sticking with this same thing we were just talking about. If manufacturing a motorcycle is elsewhere, in another country, is a cost-cutting measure, how much, if any, of the savings should be passed on to the customer?
I like this question.
And I'm thinking when I wrote this question, I was thinking specifically of. I remember when Honda switched from the CRF 230L to the 250L, larger motorcycle, and it cost less. And part of that, I believe, was because I think the 230L, if I remember at the time, was made in Japan, and the 250L was going to be made in Thailand. And for a second, as a consumer, I'm like, well, why is this bike that's basically the same spec? Why is this cheaper? And then I was like, oh, okay, country of origin. That makes a little bit of sense. So that was just where my head was at to get you
As
guys
far
sort
as
of in that.
passing on the savings. So my head immediately went back to the point that I was making earlier about the BMW F850 GS and the fact that like these engines are made in China, and depending on how much of the bike is actually made in China is up for debate. But
Well, it's really not. We don't actually know, but it's really not up for debate.
well, it's not. That's the point, right? Like it's
problem.
like it's a little bit veiled. I think that the biggest problem with a lot of people was that when that bike came out, it came out at like, for the top of the line model, was like 17.8 or something like that. Like you're looking at upwards of, by the time you're writing the actual check and paying your taxes, you're out the door for over 18 grand. And I think there was no savings passed on to the consumer. And I think that was when that bike came out, it jumped to the top of the line as far as the most expensive middleweight you could pretty much buy in the adventure segment. And there were a lot of people that were like, well, this is ridiculous. Like if I'm going to buy a bike and at least a certain portion of it's made in China, in my mind, it should cost less.
Is that where
that's my
you
mind
keep your
is. That's where my
mind?
mind is.
Okay, right. I keep mine
But
there, too.
But I do think that it goes back to the earlier point we were making too about like there's a lot of different factories in China, and if and should we automatically assume that it should cost less just because it has the made in China sticker on it or made in Thailand or whatever? Like if it's a really good factory and it's a really good engine, should we expect that there be a savings passed on to us?
I'm going to play devil's advocate, and if I worked for BMW, I would say two things. Firstly, if it's BMW quality, then it's BMW quality. And secondly, you know who BMW has a responsibility to? The shareholders,
Right.
not the customers.
Well, I guess that's my
shareholders. They're in business to make money.
That's the point that I'm making, right? And I guess I was playing devil's advocate with myself, or back at your question.
So I was a devil to the devil. I
You
was an
were,
advocate
and that
for-
sounds very familiar to the way you've lived your life up until this point. The devil's devil. But I think that for me, it's like there were a lot of people that were asking that question. Why doesn't this bike cost less? This was made in China. Well, if it's a really high quality engine, what does it matter? And why should you automatically assume it's going to cost less? You don't know what they're paying to have those engines produced. You're assuming. But if it's one of the top tier factories, like.
Right.
I'll point out too, incidentally, I'm just I know we have a lot of people who are watching and listening from other countries. We are.
How many
approaching
people
this-
do you think we have are watching?
Over 6 people, I think,
What?
watch this video.
Internationally.
Over 6, right? It's half a dozen. Advertisers, please give us a call. No, what I was gonna say though is we're thinking about this strictly from the American perspective at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this from somebody from a different country, and obviously there's a lot of different viewpoints here, but I'm thinking about the Indian-made Royal Enfield, and then I wonder how an Indian citizen feels about a Royal Enfield that's been built in America, or it's been exported to America. Like, I would love to know, because what the take on that was. Is it just a quality thing? Is it a mark of pride to have something that's made in your country, or is it a mark of pride to have a finer
I think
vehicle made somewhere else, or a worse vehicle made somewhere? Like,
But you think about that, because we're all, that's the whole Made America thing, where we kind of rally behind that at times. But I wonder if like that's the same thing whether you're in China or whether you're in India. It's like this was made in China. I'm proud of this.
I got 2 things. So
Yeah,
I
hit me.
gotta catch up. I gotta
Yeah.
catch up here. So coming from the bicycle industry, I spent a lot of time working at a bicycle shop and been a lifetime mountain biker and things like that. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, we saw a big shift in, one particular kind of. I'm trying to figure out a nice way to say all this.
all the stuff started being made in Thailand.
Well,
I'll help you.
a department store brand bought out the names of some really high-end names, like
Why are you being so protective? Are you going back to
GT.
bicycles?
Is Mongoose
It's in your industry.
paying you to say this out loud?
Listen, you talk about, GT and Mongoose were two of the big names growing up that were really high-end bicycles, BMX. And
Everybody
eventually
wanted a
mountain
Mongoose.
bikes. Right.
Everybody.
Yeah, Mongoose or GT. And then I think it was Pacific that bought those companies. And then those bikes started to be, basically Pacific's just got a GT sticker on them, and then they could sell them at Walmart.
Right, you see like
or
Ashtabula cranks on like a
or
Mongoose. What the
and then they
hell?
could sell them in department stores. But that now you're getting a GT for $200 instead of $600 or $700 or $1,000 or whatever.
Or are you getting a crap bicycle with a GT sticker on it
That's
for
exactly
$200?
it. So it's like, man, it's not binary. That whole factor. It's like, sometimes the savings passed on, but is it too much? But now I think I see it honestly, even looking at the department store bikes, you go to the Dick's Sporting Goods or whatever, they're a lot better than they were just 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that's helping people get their foot in the door. But again, those people don't care if it's a GT or it's a Mongoose or whatever, So I know I'm off on a bicycle tangent, but I think it can be compared relative to
So
this
what do those
subject.
people? Wait, time out.
Laws yet.
What do those people care about? When you say they don't care about whether it's a Mongoose, is it that the
I think
quality
that
is good enough that they're getting a quality product now?
I think there's an expiration date for the company to ride on the back of the brand's reputation, the previous reputation. It's like, are the kids riding GT mountain bikes from Target or whatever now? Do they care that those bikes were badass in the 80s? They don't know. It could still be called a Pacific or a Huffy or whatever.
I would assume, and I have no idea, but I would assume that the name of the brand, once it's diluted, there's going to be another brand that pops up that's higher quality, and then people gravitate to that one, and then that builds
or
that
maybe
up.
that's
business.
If you think about it, maybe it's the parents of the kids who identify with the brand. I don't know,
True.
but I think
the money on the bike.
if there were a comparable scenario for the motorcycle industry where there was there's this group of cheaper department store motorcycles, or there's
that was the thing. We had that though. There was Sears, Montgomery Ward, and I mean there were actually sort of lower tier, more affordable motorcycles. That actually was a thing. But all right.
Did you have a second point?
I think I did, but I forget. So
do you want to read the question? If you ask him, he'll reread the card.
Okay, go ahead. What was it again? Let me try to. I went off on the bicycle tangent so hard that I forgot what the hell I was going to say.
If manufacturing a motorcycle is a cost-cutting measure, manufacturing obviously in another country, how much, if any, of the savings should be passed on to the customer?
Oh, yeah. So
He's back, folks.
I think. Well, honestly, is there a point to where you don't feel like you're paying enough? If you could go to Harley Davidson right now,
Haagen-Dazs dilemma.
right, and then you're going to buy, the Street Series of Harley Davidsons is a perfect example. You're getting into Yamaha Bolt territory. You know what I mean? When you look at an XG
In terms
next
of
to
price?
Yeah, well, price and overall vibe of the bike and things like that. So it's just okay, well, will you spend less and get a little bit higher spec Japanese bike, or are you going to spend more and get a little bit lower spec American bike just because it says Harley Davidson on the tank? That's exactly what I'm saying.
What's made where?
I guess
And
maybe
I'm not picking on Harley Davidson. I'm just saying,
Right.
motorcycles in general are increasing.
Well, we picked on Triumph Indian. We might as well pick on Harley Davidson at this point too.
Don't worry.
Yeah,
I got
Mr. Lemlem over. I'm not going to pick
Right.
on Harley Davidson.
we'll
pick
on them
him
at the end.
If I look at a Yamaha Bolt next to any Harley Davidson Street, I think these bikes are pretty much in the same family. You know what I mean? They're both killer bikes, especially for the price. So at what point does the name on the tank matter to the consumer?
It matters to the 21-year-old Spurgeon Dunbar consumer, right? It matters to the kid that just wants, I didn't care about the country of origin. I cared about it saying Triumph. I think there's a lot of people out there that just wanted to say Harley Davidson on the side,
Right.
or they look at a Yamaha Bolt and they're like, well, that looks cooler to me. I'm going to buy that. I think this debate becomes more important as the motorcyclist becomes more ingrained in motorcycle culture.
I think that might be, in all honesty, I think that might be the most intelligent way of looking at this. If the companies aren't going to care that much, maybe the consumer shouldn't care that much. And maybe that's an interdependent relationship. I haven't really thought about it from that perspective before, but I gotta be honest, I like that more and more the more we're talking about it. I'm actually going to skip question 5 because I want to go to question 6.
Well, what was question 5?
Well, no one's going to know. Not even them. They're not even going to know. No one's going to know.
Guys, there's a missing question.
I want to go right to 6.
Leaves them wanting.
In the interest of time, because I don't want these people to have to listen to a 9-hour
They'll
podcast.
sit here for 9 hours. Look at them out there. They're on the edge of their seat.
They're watching 3 people with poor hygiene sitting around on a couch.
I showered this morning. How dare you?
The fact that you're parading that is evidence. I want to get right to this one because I think this is kind of the crux of it. Honestly, this is probably what we're going to see the most comments on. So let's get into question 6 here. Are there political, economic, or moral issues related to purchasing a motorcycle made elsewhere? Or is the pride of buying a motorcycle made in a given area just jingoist? So what I'm asking you is, because you guys...
Jingoist.
You guys have made it clear that
Go ahead, ask him what jingoist means.
Yeah, calendar of
We
the
have
day.
Google. Well, you can pause and go
the
look it
word
up.
of the day calendar guy.
The reason I'm asking is because you guys, we came at this from, I think, different points. We go back to question 1, right? Like, I kind of care about where my motorcycles are made. You guys don't so much. What I'm almost asking you here is, do you understand the other point of view?
Do I understand the people that care about... So you're asking me, one,
Are there political, economic, and moral issues? Do you know what they are, et cetera? Or do you think those people are just jingoists? I just want to ride my Merkin back. Like, what?
I'm sure that for certain people, there are moral issues. I would ask those people if they have an iPhone in their pocket, and if they have those same moral objections to the fact that they're carrying around an iPhone, because there's been horrible reports about the
nets
factories
and the stairwells.
I mean, so I have an iPhone, and I've read those reports, and I haven't gotten rid of my iPhone. So like, I would be hypocritical to say like, I can't understand that point of view. I mean, I can understand that point of view
because it's in keeping with your previous.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand if someone said to me like, "Hey, I don't buy an iPhone because like I don't like the working conditions that they force these people to be in."
Right.
You are a better person than me. I'm not, and I mean that genuinely.
Yeah.
Like I wish that I had some of like that higher end belief system. And not that I don't, wouldn't want better conditions for all people, but like at the end of the day, like, oh well, this is what I'm familiar with, and this works really well, and I can do everything, so I buy it. And I think sometimes I just forget. So, I mean, I think we're all guilty of that too. Sometimes we forget or we can't put ourselves in the position of those other people.
You were throwing like all the wisdom out today.
No,
You're
I have a buddy right now.
I'm hang it up here.
I have a buddy right now who is actually living in China. He's laid some really crazy knowledge on me about like what it is to live and to work in China and really what they see over there. And it's been, I mean, for me, just hearing his stories have been eye-opening. So I can't.
Can you
please
imagine. Tell us if it's really good or really bad or somewhere in between?
From what I've heard, it's leaned towards the
real bad.
The bad side of what it's.
Well, I mean, when you
like.
think about it, it's like how much is that peace of mind worth, like monetarily? You know what I mean? Like, would you be willing to pay double for a phone or whatever, or sneakers or boots or a motorcycle or anything? Would you pay that much more money, or could you even afford it to have the peace of mind? Like, okay, this was built by Joe Smith in the factory, down the road, and he's in a union, and he's getting raises and promotions, and he's got vacation time and all this kind of stuff, great working conditions.
Yeah, but now your iPhone costs you $2,700.
Right. So it's like, where do you draw the line, or can you even draw the line?
Yeah, but should it cost you $2,700? Should it cost you somebody's life?
So that's great. That's a great question.
So and the reason I bring it up is like I come at this differently than you guys. The American in me says buy an American motorcycle. Mm-hmm. The capitalist in me says buy the best motorcycle that you can buy for the least amount of money. Before both of those things, though, guys, I'm a Roman Catholic. We're
going to get into religion on this?
We are. I believe I have a moral duty to keep people from living in abject poverty under terrible conditions. So, I'm sitting here, I'm wearing a pair of American-built work boots, I'm wearing American-made pants. Like, I take it kind of seriously. It's not because I'm jingoist at all. It's not because America. It's because at very least, I know that somebody who's made that stuff in America is like they're working in safe conditions. They got shoes on at a factory. Mm-hmm. My point, though, the only reason I brought it up is just I think that a lot of times when I mentioned that I do ride American motorcycles for a few reasons, but that is one of them. But people don't always know that, and I don't always want to even explain it to them. But it's one of those things where I guess I would ask everybody out in viewer and listener land if you are, if you do run into somebody who does that, maybe their motives aren't what you think they are, and just back off for a minute and maybe ask them. That was all.
What about you? Did you want to weigh in a little bit heavier on this?
Yeah, well, again, it's another tangent. I went off on the bicycle thing last time, but, my dad was a car salesman growing up selling import cars. So, I grew up in a Datsun dealership in the 80s.
What's a Datsun?
It's a pre-Nissan. So, at the time when you think about, the fuel crisis and how that killed all the big American barge cars, and then, the Japanese had already figured out how to build an economy car that was good on fuel and everything like that, and easy to park and easy to drive, cheap. When I was a kid, where everyone said, oh, well, Japanese cars, they're junk. And then, fast forward 10 years, it's like, oh, well, Japanese cars are the most reliable things you can get. You're getting the biggest bang for the buck. So,
they're all made here.
Well, that's exactly it. And then, when you think about the fact that there is a bit of a harsh curve, trying to produce an item for a certain amount of money based on maybe using cheaper labor or lesser quality factories, but it grows. Nothing is ever static. None of these countries or factories or economies are just forever I only make $1 an hour and I work 100 hours a week. It's just man, you got to go through, we went through it, through the Depression and everything like that. So I think that,
well, you look at all those laws that you were talking about earlier, and those laws came because of ridiculously oppressive working conditions in America.
Yep.
And it wasn't that long ago.
Right.
The Industrial Revolution in America was in the overall theory of time, in the overall
just think
vast vacuum of time, it was such a small fragment of time ago that we didn't have anything like this in America protecting American workers.
Yeah.
Guys, we've been chatting now for ever.
And we've also skipped a question, which I'm still sitting here.
We're still
as soon as those cammers stop rolling, I'm going to pull question 5 and see what it says.
I'm going to cut this thing off. I think, as always, we agree on, absolutely nothing.
We agree on something.
Okay, very little. Right, okay. For those of you who have been checking this out, if you want more of this, gosh, I can't even imagine why you would, but check out that podcast. We beefed it up. There's more.
Yeah, I can tell you why you would want to check it out, because there is an awesome interview with Chris Fillmore. I was actually really stoked to hear all the stuff that he had to say, so I would love for you to check that out as well. And we dive into the questions and comments that you, the viewer, have left for us.
Indeed. I think that'll about do it. For Spurgey, Joe, I'm Lem. We're out of here.